The burst came in at 0317, station time, and it didn't sound like anything. That's the honest accounting of it. I've worked the comms chair at Relay Station Anthe for 11 years, and I know what a distress call sounds like. I know what a navigational bleed sounds like. I know what a badly aimed prayer band hymn sounds like, because we get 2 or 3 a year from a religious convoy out past the Culverin Gap that keeps miskeying their broadcast coordinates. I know the sound of a dying relay buoy, which is a kind of slow moan, and I know the sound of a dead star's last electromagnetic exhale, which is not a moan at all but something like a patient sigh. The burst at 0317 did not sound like any of those things. It sounded like 2 people screaming into the same corridor at the same time, from opposite ends, running toward each other in the dark. I pulled the raw waveform up on the secondary panel and looked at it for a while. Station Anthe is a small post, pressurized rock, 3 personnel, an orange dwarf outside the viewport that gives everything a color like old copper, and a sensor array that covers 42 light minutes of the gap in every direction. We are not a fleet depot. We are not a strategic relay. We are, in the formal language of the Earthcom's Directorate, a forward-listening installation, which is a bureaucratic way of saying, we sit here and pay attention so that the bigger posts don't have to. My assignment to Anthe was something of a polite demotion after I filed a 7-page objection to a frequency reallocation proposal that my superiors considered settled. I don't regret it. The gap is quiet most of the time, and quiet suits me, and on the nights when it isn't quiet, the fact that I am here and paying attention turns out to matter. I was paying attention. The waveform had 2 distinct carrier signatures braided together so tightly that the autoparser had thrown up its hands and logged the burst as probable interference. I told the autoparser it was wrong and started separating the strands by hand. It took 40 minutes. The orange dwarf crawled across the viewport, and Specialist Hukura came in from the bunk corridor, poured himself a cup of something hot, looked at my screen, and said nothing, which is the correct response when you see a senior officer doing meticulous work with an expression that suggests she has not yet decided whether she is afraid. The first signal resolved into something I recognized structurally, even if I couldn't read a word of it. Automated, compressed, a tight burst format I'd seen in the Directorate's archive files, the kind of encoding standard that hadn't been in active use for 3 centuries or more. Whoever sent it hadn't sent it. It had sent itself, some automatic system, old enough that the power cell degradation had altered its timing signature, had fired off a help request on what it thought was its own civilization's emergency band. That civilization's emergency band had shifted, apparently, sometime in the past 340 years. The frequency it landed on instead was ours. The second signal was different, newer, ragged in the way that hand-keyed distress transmissions get ragged when the person keying them is frightened and doing it fast, and probably not sitting in ideal conditions. I could parse maybe a third of the linguistic content. Enough. A refugee transport convoy, 9 vessels, had lost 2 ships to a debris field. Bad navigation, bad luck. The report didn't make entirely clear which, and was transmitting on their own emergency band, toward their own people, requesting immediate assistance. Their own people's emergency band and our monitoring frequency were close enough, in this sector, that the bleed was significant. They had not aimed it at us. There is no universe in which they aimed it at us. Their transmission contained, if I am reading the partial linguistic parse correctly, 0 awareness that Earth monitored this frequency at all. 2 signals, different senders, different centuries, arguably. Neither one of them was for us. I looked at the merged waveform for a long time. Hukura had stopped pretending to drink his hot thing and was watching me instead. 2 separate calls, I said. That's what it looks like, he said. One of them is 300 years old and the sender civilization may not exist anymore. Probably not, he said. The other one is current, 9 vessels, 2 confirmed losses. The surviving 7 are sitting in the middle of the Culverin Gap with wounded aboard. Seems like, he said. I pulled up the dispatch form. The coordinates from the second signal were approximate. The keying had been fast, the position data partially corrupted, but I had enough to put a response within useful range. The first signal's origin point was a ghost. The automated beacon's position fix was 3 centuries stale, and the object that sent it, whatever it was, had almost certainly moved or gone dark in the intervening time. I filed the request at 0401. I requested 3 ships: the patrol frigate Kemmer's Watch, which was close, the supply tender Arrowroot, which carried medical stores, and the hospital vessel Quiet Return, which was on a routine transit 2 sectors over, and could detour without significant delay. I noted in the dispatch that the call was a merged signal, that one component was of indeterminate ancient origin and the sender status was unknown, and that the other component was a current refugee convoy in active distress, coordinates approximate. The duty officer at Sector Relay MHEN took 11 minutes to approve it. I don't know why I included the ancient signal in the dispatch at all. Procedurally, I didn't have to. The refugee convoy was sufficient justification on its own. But the old beacon had been sitting out there for 340 years, firing at a frequency its own civilization had long since abandoned. And at 0401, on a copper-lit morning at Relay Station Anthe, something about leaving it unremarked seemed wrong. I logged it. The ships would arrive at the refugee convoy's position, and they wouldn't find the ancient beacon's source. That was almost certain, but the log would exist. Someone would look at it eventually. Maybe. The Kemmer's Watch reached the convoy first, 47 hours after dispatch. I was on my second shift cycle by then, running on stimulant tabs and the particular focused calm that comes from having made a decision you can't unmake. The frigate's comms officer patched a relay back to Anthe, and I sat at my panel and listened. The surviving 7 ships were in poor condition. 2 more had sustained serious hull damage in the debris field that had taken the first 2, and a third was venting atmosphere from a secondary compartment. The refugee convoy's captain, the comms officer, gave me a name in a language that the station's translator rendered as something close to Tessavar Yon, had been coordinating the survivors for 47 hours, on what sounded like no sleep and bad coffee. The Arrowroot was 40 minutes behind the frigate. The Quiet Return was 6 hours out. Both were coming. Captain Yon asked, through the translation layer, who they had called. The Kemmer's Watch comms officer relayed the question to me. I don't know why she did. It was my station that had dispatched, technically, so maybe she thought it was my answer to give. I thought about it. I thought about the 2 signals braided together in the waveform at 0317, the ancient automated beacon misfiring on a dead frequency, and the captain's frightened hands on a keying board, and how those 2 things had ended up in the same 42 light minutes of monitored space at the same time, which was not a plan, and not a coordination, and not a treaty or a pact or any kind of formal arrangement. It was just what happened. They didn't call us, I said, into the relay. 2 signals crossed on our frequency. We were listening. The Kemmer's Watch comms officer passed it along. There was a pause. Captain Yon's reply came back through the translation layer 30 seconds later. I've thought about it since. The way you think about things that are true, and also not quite enough. She said, we had no one else. I wrote it into the station log at the end of my shift. I wrote it carefully, the way you write things you want the record to carry forward, in the formal language of the directorate, where every word is supposed to mean exactly what it says. Contact, merged distress signal, 0317 station time. Carrier 1, ancient automated beacon, civilization of origin unknown, signal age approximately 340 years, sender status indeterminate. Carrier 2, refugee transport convoy, 9 vessels, 2 initial losses, additional casualties. Dispatch filed 0401. 3 vessels dispatched. Kemmer's Watch, Arrowroot, Quiet Return. Contact made 47 hours post-dispatch. Survivors stabilized. 2 ships total loss. The convoy did not contact Earth directly. The ancient beacon was not aimed at Earth. Both signals occupied the same monitored frequency simultaneously, and were received as a merged burst. I sat there for a moment with the log open, cursor blinking. Then I added one more line. We were listening. That counts. I closed the log and started the next shift.